Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Real Birding Podcast, the show where we crack open the world of birding and talk about our own birding adventures. I'm Will Keller, coming to you from Charlotte, North Carolina.
And I am Caleb Putnam, coming from Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Well, I'm excited for this episode today because we are going to talk about a topic that is very near and dear to our hearts, and it's kind of fundamental to what most modern birders do, and that is citizen science. Citizen science has been a very important part of birding since even before birding was really even an established hobby. You can speak to this very well because you have been a bird scientist, an avian scientist, an ornithologist, however you want to spin that for your whole career. So it should be a fun conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's birds is the ultimate group of study animals and organisms for this because there's just so much public interest. And basically, people don't realize, but once you become a birder, you are a scientific data collector, whether you know it or not. And citizen science has really leveraged this and taken advantage of it and made everybody have a lot of fun,
That's exactly right. Yeah. It helps even with the gamification, which only becomes more and more relevant. Before we get into our topic for today, let's touch on last week's bird quiz. Last week, we played for y'all the call of a summer tanager, which is a staple of much of the sort of eastern woodlands, but it stops being prevalent in the north, so many Michigan birders may not have been familiar with that. But that didn't fool Brandon Aho. He got that correct. I hope I'm pronouncing Aho correctly. A-H-O. Good job, Brandon.
Shout out to Brandon over in St. Clair County. Good to see that he's been watching us. I also wanted to point out, Will, that when you said it was the call of the summer tanager, you're spot on. It was not the song. The song is the cheery up, cheerio stuff. And what we played was the picky-tuck, picky-tucky-tuck, that kind of stuff. And that is indeed the call note. So well done.
Exactly. I love that call note too. It's really easy to get once you hear it a few times.
Oh, it's so distinctive. The only place you could confuse it is if you get to, the West, and Western tanager and I think flame colored will do similar little triplet, but they sound a little weird though. So for people over most of the places in North America, that's going to be pretty straightforward, pretty unique.
That's right. Now, this week, we are going to play for y'all the song of a North American bird. And if you think you know the name of that bird, drop it in the comments for a chance at a shout out at the beginning of next week's episode. Here we go. We'll leave it there. This is one that I'm surprised at how many people don't know the song of this bird. And I think it's because it's so nondescript. It's just a sort of jarbled, slurry mumble that can kind of get lost in the background. So if you know the name of that bird, drop it in the comments for a chance at a shout out. But otherwise, let's talk about citizen science.
Do it.
Again, like I said in the intro, this topic is very near and dear to our hearts, and the data collection is actually like a key point of what I love about birding. It makes it so fun to be able to pay attention to your sightings throughout history and other people's sightings throughout history.
Yeah, I mean, when you start birding, you tend to think like, well, what can I go see? And it's kind of an inward looking thing. It's like a hobby. You get some joy out of it. But what becomes so cool so fast is that you can immediately start using the sightings that you have and the records that you keep for a bigger purpose and give back to science and give back to even conservation. Ultimately, there's so many tools for doing this these days, and it's just fun. It's so fun for folks. You learn, you network, and you get a whole bunch more experience.
Yeah, so kind of like a little bit of the long history of this. Birding in general first started as a slightly more scientific practice, at least as far as we know from the records that are kept. We don't really have people's bird lists necessarily from the 1600s and whatnot, but we know at least in the 1800s that scientists would be commissioned by like royal societies and whatnot to go on these vast expeditions to collect bird species and bring them back for scientific study and to be described by European science for the first time. A lot of times I think people get a little bit confused when they say first described to science. Obviously, the American crow was well known to indigenous communities here. But for Europeans, it would have been, a new species as far as they could distinguish it from European crows. Don't you think that's about right?
Yeah. Historic records were probably more project specific, like Darwin going to the Galapagos Islands, for example, or a certain expedition. They took specimens. There was a lot of collecting and that kind of stuff.
Right.
and less watching. And so you end up with kind of scattershot records, and there's not even coverage. Certain countries get more coverage, or certain spots get coverage that and other places don't. And I think that's the real benefit of birding being so popular these days is we have worldwide coverage, or nearly worldwide coverage. And with the internet and eBird and everything, it's all now being put into one place. And when people go somewhere, they're collecting complete checklists rather than just
Right.
scattershot, like writing down a few of the things they saw. They're writing down everything they saw. So the power of it has just transformed.
Yeah, that's right. I like thinking of birding as sort of evolving out of sport hunting for birds. There was this sort of long tradition of shooting as many different birds as you could around Christmas time, sort of a Christmas tradition that probably fathers and sons would do with each other. And so the legend goes in the year 1900, that December, Frank Chapman, who was an American ornithologist, suggested counting birds around Christmas time instead of hunting them, and that led to the creation of the longest citizen science tradition that we have, which is the Christmas bird
Wow.
count.
Speaking of Frank Chapman, one of my study species in graduate school was the short-billed dowitcher and the long-billed dowitcher, and we found some specimens that he had collected, if my memory is not failing here, in South America, and he was the collector on the tag. So it's pretty cool connection to have actually held specimens collected by him.
That's really awesome. Yeah, I definitely don't have any connections to Frank Chapman other than participating in the Christmas bird count. Do you remember the first year you participated in a Christmas bird count?
Well, I wouldn't be able to tell you the exact year, Will, but what I do remember was growing up in Lapeer County, Michigan. Our nearest nature center was Seven Ponds, and that they're still going. Daryl Bernard, colleague of ours, Danny Bernard, was on the podcast, his son. And back when I was probably in elementary school, maybe middle school, would have been late 80s. I had been learning birding just kind of on my own by getting out in the habitat with my Peterson guide and just tinkering and so on. But there was no internet, no mentors. And this Christmas bird count was one of the first opportunities where I'm like, I could go hang out with people who know birds and learn a bunch more and get connected. And I do specifically remember jumping in the car. I want to say it was Dan Farmer. He used to be executive director out there, if memory serves. That was a long time ago. I think it was with him and maybe a, a carload of a few others. And I just remember driving around and being fascinated by having leadership from people who knew it. It was just so invigorating. You know the feeling, Will, right? When you're a beginner birder and you're hungry for it and you want somebody that can give you all the intel and teach you how to do the mysterious identifications that you don't know how to do yet. And I
Yeah.
remember just feeling like I got my fill.
And for I don't know about for you, but for me, it was the emphasis on list keeping on the Christmas bird count that I just couldn't get enough of because I spent a lot of time birding with my mom and my grandma, and for them, it was a lot more about the individual birds and just enjoying nature and seeing some species and getting good looks. But what I always really liked is like adding a bird to the list and then sort of adding the sort of maybe a little bit of a competitive edge because you're a little bit competing against other people in different sections to figure out who can see the coolest bird or who can see the most species of birds. And I just love that aspect of it. And it makes
Yeah,
sense that it's the longest going birding, data tradition that we have.
right. Although it is funny how birders can go two different directions on this topic, right? There's those who love the list, and as soon as the list keeping thing comes, it just satisfies that coin collecting or stamp collecting urge that some of us have. And then there's others who are just like, oh, you're just taking the fun out of it. I just want to look at the animals and see how cool they are, and just have experiences with them. I just I don't want this to turn into work. So I've seen it where it can go both ways that way.
Absolutely. Here's another little good set of facts about the Christmas bird count. So on the 101st Christmas bird count, which would have been in 2001, 52,471 people participated at 1,823 locations across 17 countries.
Wow.
I don't think I have updated numbers for that, but you can only imagine that it's grown since then. I mean, think about how massive that data set is. Even 24 years on from that.
So, Will, check this out. This is the map of all Christmas bird count circles for the current time, and just the breadth of the coverage here. I mean, each of these sites, you have a specific circle. So you can zoom in and look at it, of a specific radius, and you instruct all the volunteers who are there to cover a certain slice of the pie or certain area and count every bird they can find, and you tally it up, and then you can add up this information across all of these circles, and it gives you a snapshot in time of bird distribution and abundance. And so any patterns that are changing over time of like winter distributions moving north, or a certain species dropping out and becoming really rare, or even smaller changes than that, tend to really show up in this data set. You think about, if you wanted to collect a data set like this, how many birders would you need to hire? How much would you have to pay them to spread out across the continent and cover all of these areas? It's so impractical. There's not a chance of it happening. But
Right.
yet, when you pool together volunteers who are doing it and getting some other, you know, fun out of it, and they're learning, and they're feeling like they're part of something bigger, then this is what happens. So it's really a thing of beauty, and I highly encourage everybody to participate and bring your kids. This is a really kid friendly one too. Not necessarily the youngest kids, but ones that are a little bit more focused, and they can get a lot of fun out of this. It's something to do in the middle of the cold northern winter, when you might be a little bit bored of the stuff you're seeing in the backyard.
Unlike the Christmas bird count, the next kind of citizen science that I want to talk about takes place in the exact opposite time of the year, when there are tons of breeding migratory birds around, and that is breeding bird surveys. And I am ashamed to say that I have never had a breeding bird survey route, so I don't actually know a ton about this. Can you speak to a little bit of the tradition and what the breeding bird surveys look like?
I sure can. In fact, I have had a route for most of my adult life since I've been in Michigan. Anyway, I would have to say I think the breeding bird survey is probably the single most valuable citizen science project there has been, because it's a little bit of a mixture of, it's not just anybody can participate in it. You have to be a bit more of an intermediate to advanced level birder. You have to be pretty focused. In the 1960s, the scientist Chandler Robbins, who actually just passed away not too long ago, a couple of years ago, and he's an absolute legend. He wanted to find a way to determine if breeding birds in North America were increasing their populations, holding steady, or going down. He wanted it to be across all of the species. And he thought, well, what is the way to actually accomplish this? And again, you can't hire an army of people big enough to do this. It's not practical. So what they did is they spread out these routes across the entire continent, and one time per summer during a specific week of the summer, you send the same observer, and what they do is they drive a 25-mile route starting, I think, 20 to 30 minutes prior to dawn. So it's super systematic. You have to do it just right. And you stop at 50 points along the 25-mile route, and you count everything you can see in here for 3 minutes. But as soon as that 3-minute timer goes off, you stop. So it's an actual scientific sample. And then that information, you usually start like 5:30 a.m. in Michigan, and you're done by anywhere from 9 to like 10:30, something like that. And then there's hundreds of these routes all across the US and Canada. I think it's 4,100 survey routes. Yeah,
Wow.
4,100. And this information, because it's collected in such a systematic way, and they don't compare across observers, they only compare data from the same observer in different years. And so it's extremely powerful for being able to tell if a species is increasing or decreasing, or keeping its population at the same level. And this continues to this day, and is still extremely popular. In my opinion, this is one that birders should shoot to have in their arsenal at some point as they get into the more advanced level. Especially the better you get at bird vocalizations, because a lot of it's just hearing. It is a humongous contribution to bird conservation and to conservation generally to take part in this one. This one's a little bit less social. You need to do it by yourself. You need to not be distracted. But the power of the data set is so huge, because Partners in Flight and all these other conservation initiatives, where they're trying to figure out, well, what species of birds do we need to work on so that they're preserved, their numbers are preserved in the future, and they don't go extinct 100 years from now. This is probably the primary data set that they use to say, well, we know that Canada warblers are decreasing, or we know that rusty blackbirds are down 99% since 1966.
Yeah.
When you hear those statistics, it's talking about the BBS, the Breeding Bird Survey.
Yeah, it's amazing. I really do. Once I'm really settled in, I got to get a route because I'm feeling like I'm not paying it forward in terms of the breeding bird data.
So, Will, this is a map showing the location of all of the Breeding Bird Survey routes in the United States. And you'll notice that they're really randomly spread out and and randomized across the landscape, no matter where you look. And that's on purpose because then that allows you to actually make statistical inferences and say, yes, when it says that Canada warblers are going down, it's actually a reliable statistic. They don't just put these routes right next to where somebody lives. So, in some cases, you have to drive a certain distance to get there. This particular route is one that I covered for many years, and I passed it off to another person just because I was unable to logistically handle it anymore. But I also used to do Walloon Lake, which is one of these two, and I also did Lake City, which is one of these two here. For many years, probably about 7 years in a row, I did these two, and I would kind of take like a weekend, and go up there and do it Saturday morning and Sunday morning and make a weekend out of it. Found some pretty cool stuff over the years.
Walloon Lake is not a bad place to be that time of year either, is it?
It's gorgeous. I mean, it's classic northern Michigan. Very, very rural, very forested, and very wildlife rich. I mean, I was getting like black-throated blue warbler on some of the routes, and American bittern, upland sandpiper, grasshopper sparrow, all kinds of cool stuff.
Yeah, that's amazing.
But Will, what about for observers who aren't maybe at the advanced level or looking for something they can do a little closer to home?
Yeah, not only that, I know like my grandma loves a specific event every year, and that is the Great Backyard Bird Count and Project FeederWatch. I actually can't remember which one she participates in specifically, but these are two different ways that you can collect meaningful data from your living room window, and you can do it in a time of year where you want to be inside anyways, which is all throughout the sort of winter season when birds are hunkering down and gathering as much resources as they can to survive these winters.
This is another way of producing valuable data because there's so many people doing it over a huge geography, and you don't even have to do travel or in many cases you don't even have to train. You can literally just watch your feeder and send the data in for what you see. Now you've got the feeder watch, which is a winter long one, so that'll start in November and go through April. And then you've also got Great Backyard Bird Count.
Yeah, that's a smaller period of time. That's only a few weeks, right?
Yeah, Great Backyard Bird Count actually is like 4 days
Right.
in February. And like, for example, this year it's going to be this coming winter, it's going to be February 13th through 16th. That'll vary a little bit. Sometimes it's as early as February 12th. Other times it's as late as February 21st. This one is probably as much outreach and trying to get more engagement from beginners and folks who are really just starting out. And it's been
Gotcha.
really successful at that, and hilariously, and we'll get to this in a minute, but the data that you put in is actually just put into eBird for most of these, which is for sure the best way to do this. But it really gets to the fact that eBird is sort of the pinnacle when it comes to citizen science. I mean, it's where a lot of the stuff gets dumped.
Yeah, and maybe we should just go right to there. It's hard to talk about citizen science and birding without talking about the revolution that is eBird. Not only in data collection, but in everything with birds. You can't even count the number of ways that it has changed the way that birders bird and made it easier, lowered the barriers to entry. But from a strict data standpoint, can you please tell me, how does the data collection in eBird work? Because there's not as many specific protocols that you're following. It's more of a throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks in terms of data. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, what people used to do with pen and paper, pencil and paper, or whatever, they would write down some of the birds that they saw. In some cases, they would write all of it down, and then it would sit on your shelves. And the person would pass away, and it would all get thrown out because family members didn't know there was all this valuable information in there. And the first idea about this was, why don't we just get all the observations in one place? So that was really where the idea began. And then once people started submitting it in an online format, it just got more and more systematic. Now, so like you said, if you happen to see like a turkey on the roadside, you want to put it in, well, you just have to tell eBird that was an incidental observation. You weren't birding at the time. You just happened to see it. And eBird accepts all of this stuff. So that would be an incidental. Now, if you went somewhere to birding and to try to find as many species as you can, and you're counting them all and reporting them all, that's a complete checklist. And there's a whole variety of ways to put it in there. And there's traveling counts, there's stationary counts for ones where you just stand still for a certain amount of time. You put in the exact start time, distances, durations, all that kind of stuff. And then you put all the birds in. And it's just grown in complexity to the point that, there's anywhere you go, there's a localized filter. It'll pull up and tell you what's supposed to be there that week at that geography. So it's just gotten incredibly advanced. I mean, there's over 1 billion observations worldwide now, and Cornell and Audubon, who sort of co-run it, but Cornell's kind of the center of it. They've gone around the world and marketed this thing and really got it going, and it's nascent in certain areas. There's areas like Europe had their own system, and it's a little bit of a harder sell there because you're asking them to change from their system to this new one. And we don't use the European names in a lot of cases. You know what I mean? So it's a kind of an Americanized or American centric one, but people
Yeah.
are doing it, and the breadth of the data is phenomenal.
So Europeans came around to eBird. Do you think that's the dominant way to log checklists now?
That's an open question. I think it's probably not the dominant one. I think it depends on the country. The UK had their own system that folks are pretty set on. And so I think a small percentage of birders there will use eBird. And in other countries in Europe where it might not have been as entrenched, whatever system they had, were a little bit more open to it. But you can open up the European honey buzzard map and look at it, and there's data from every country in there. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really penetrated to places like Azerbaijan. There are people submitting eBird data there. Even as you get into the stands, some of them are better than others, but Kazakhstan has a lot of data. So Russia doesn't, for political reasons. There's not as much freedom and perhaps wealth and internet access. I don't know exactly, but there's, you get my
Well,
point though. It's everywhere.
and population too. Most of that country doesn't have any people in it.
Right. There's always that. But, even in the city centers, you can see that there's not very many people doing it. I think it's mostly people from outside Russia that are traveling and there, and just a few of the locals are using it at this point. But, it'll get better and better. And what it has done is it's just transformed the scene, and having 1 billion observations from all over the world. What that opens up is not only the unique opportunity to publish papers from it.
Yeah, so check this out. The official number here is 1,180 publications that are using eBird data. So if we just look through the first few here, connected impacts, combining migration tracking data with species distribution models, revealing the complex potential impacts of climate change on European bee eaters. Another one here, 4 more records of rusty tinamou. That's a very obvious way to use eBird
Yep.
to count sightings. But there's more complicated ones here. Assessing potential distributions of bird endemic species using case studies. I'll do one more here. The cumulative niche approach, a framework to assess the performance of ecological niche model projections. Now that's
It's
the kind of
endless,
one.
Will.
But
Yeah.
I love this concept here because it's not very obvious how you would use individual reports of birds to make this kind of assessment, but you can do all sorts of population modeling based off of these data. You can look at population trends, and it can even help geneticists look back in time and figure out like complicated genetic relationships between things. So it's such a powerful tool.
Yeah, it's incredible. Scientists who will get a little critical and say, well, the data were not collected in a perfectly uniform way by qualified people of uniform experience level. That's the downside of things. But what's the upside is that you have a breadth of coverage and a number of observers that's so high that it starts to swamp some of those things out. As long as the statisticians don't overreach and they analyze the data correctly, you can make broad scale inferences that you'd not be able to do in any other kind of study. It's just impossible. So in addition to all of the science that we're talking about, the other incredibly awesome part of it is what it allows birders to do, because what would have been records just stuck on people's shelves and scattershot and you'd never be able to find it is all in one place. So like when you travel to a new area, you can pull up your target species, and it's incredibly powerful for this. Whereas, I mean, how else would you do it? You'd either have to hire a local guide who knows everything and then just rely on them to tell you everything, or you'd have to do weeks and weeks of research, and you'd probably still only get a partial picture of things. But with the way eBird
So
is,
imagine you are going to Kruger National Park for the first time and you don't know the first thing besides broadly what groups of birds are going to be there. Why don't you share your screen and just show us what you would do if you were going to Kruger National Park from an eBird perspective?
probably the first thing I would do is I would pull up the bar chart like this. I'd go South Africa, Eastern Cape, which is, I believe, where that is. And then you can just look through here. Anything that's thick and green throughout the year is a common resident bird, Egyptian goose. You have rare residents like black bustard, skinnier line. You have migrant birds that are there in the winter, the Derek cuckoo, and they're not there in the austral summer. So you can start with that. And then once you have a clear picture of where you're going to go, you can actually get into a prioritized list here. So let's go target species. We're going to go the Eastern Cape. We want it to look at data for the month that is the month we're going to be there. So let's say the month we're going to be there is July. Okay.
Yeah.
And you want to see birds for your world life list. And then you just do this, show target species. So now what it does is it compares your eBird life list with what's there at that month, and it gives it to you in order of abundance. So 39% of the checklists in South Africa or in the Eastern Cape of South Africa in that month have Hadada ibis on them. And you can click the map and look at that. I mean, this literally just becomes an endless tool. And you can go through as you're birding there and just knock these down one by one by one.
Yeah.
As you get to the bottom of the list, birds are like less than 1%. Well, these are probably rarities. You're probably not going to get them. But I would say anything that's in the few percent range and above is going to be very gettable. So essentially you can make optimal use of your time while you're there because of these tools. Whereas previously, if you didn't have access to this type of stuff, you'd be wondering, well, how many species could I have gotten that I was going to miss?
Right.
Another way, let's pick something that's a little bit rarer. Say you've been birding the Eastern Cape for 2 weeks and you still haven't come up with a yellow-throated longclaw, okay? And you want to see a yellow-throated longclaw. So what I would do is go to eBird and then species maps and then put in yellow-throated longclaw. And we are going to sort the data by July to July. And we are going to zoom in to where we are staying, which is going to be in Kruger National Park area here. Orange pins are the ones more recent than 30 days. And blue is ones that are more distant than that. And you could also sort for the current year if you're only wanting to look at, sightings that are currently coming in. And if you're staying here and you want to see this species, well, there you go. You can see which of these sites have the most of them and are the most quickest drive to get to, or the easiest to get to. So you can basically, anything you want to do, you can knock it down one by one in a way that you never would have been able to do before, at least not easily. And why? Well, it's just because all these birders are putting in their data. They might be doing it for selfish reasons, but it's having this benefit to the community as a whole in the scientific output, in bird finding, and just enjoyment of the community at all overall.
Yeah, we're so grateful to our friends at the Cornell lab for putting this together and managing it and making it better every single year. It seems like every year they come out with little updates and new features and fixing little bugs. I remember when I first got on eBird, there were some issues with it that I didn't like, some sticky buttons that didn't work very well. And by God, they have fixed just about everything. It is a clean user interface.
Well, especially when you as a user are getting a powerful database and a powerful data entry system that you don't even have to pay for. In any other segment of life, if you had something this powerful, you would for sure be paying a monthly price to subscribe to it or to be able to use it. And I think that's, the fact that it has such breadth of use and Cornell is able to use it for fundraising purposes and get all these other benefits so they can fund it in other ways. But, even though there's a few things I would probably add to it, and it's just on the whole, we don't have any basis to complain.
Yeah. Before we sign off, I want to ask you one thing. You are an eBird reviewer, which means there are many of our listeners will have dealt with eBird reviewers before. And usually I find it's very rare that people have a a good opinion of their eBird reviewers when they don't know them. A lot of the time, it just feels like you're getting nagged and asked for details about stuff that you are positive that you saw. So, can you run us through what the review process looks like?
I mean, basically, in a nutshell, if somebody's going to go look at the species maps that I just pulled up, you want to know that if the record, if it shows that there's one there, you want to know that it really was there, right? That's basically the purpose of reviewers, is to vet not only the identity of the birds, but that people are entering the protocol accurately so that it can be used for those scientific studies and that kind of stuff. And so basically, we set these filters for each county or province, and we tell it that, in this week of the year, this species is so rare that if you want to eBird it, it's going to flag it. And then anybody who's eBirded knows this. Occasionally you put something in, it flags it, and then you have to put in a description, and then you submit, and then those flagged records are put into a queue, a list for me, and I log in once a day or whatever, go through what's in there, and I either contact folks to ask for more documentation, or I can just sort of validate them and move on, or or change the filter. And that's basically it. It's a volunteer position, using your expertise that you've lived in that area for a long time, and you have a really good thumb on the pulse of things. And you get to know the folks too, and you're a steward. Like, that's how I view it. Hopefully people in my counties would say that about me. I try to make a
Yeah.
real effort to welcome everybody, help them learn. And especially if they're like, hey, well, I didn't realize that I misidentified this bird. How do you do this better? I will send them all kinds of materials and stuff, and I'll talk to
Oh,
them about to the end of the earth about it. It's great.
Caleb, I got to tell you, you probably don't remember this, but before we were really good friends, when I was getting back into birding as a 19-year-old, or I guess a 20-year-old in the winter of 2020, I was up at Grand Haven and I eBirded an eared grebe, and I had taken a photo of this bird and I reported it on eBird, and I get this email from Caleb Putnam at ebird.com or whatever. And you basically, it was the cut and paste. Can you please provide more documentation for the species? It's rare at your location. So I responded and I said, well, I'm not sure if it was an eared grebe or a horn grebe. And you said, I'm pretty sure it's a horn grebe. Do you have a picture? So I sent you the picture and you said, yep, absolutely. And you annotated the photo that I sent you, pointing to different field marks on the bird, showing how they would be different if it were an eared grebe. So you are the best eBird reviewer I have ever dealt with for that, because it was full of compassion and kindness and education. And I definitely, the same can't be said for every eBird reviewer, although most of them are more harmless than probably a lot of people want to believe.
Funny enough, as you were bringing this up, I actually pulled up the email because I had totally forgotten about this. And you're right, it's March 2020. And here's the photo. And I can totally see why you might think that it was eared. And then we went back and forth on it. And I've probably done thousands of threads with people like this. And it's just, it's just part of the job, and it's part of the joy of it ultimately. I feel like I have an army of birders who have really upped their game and who really take pride in their submissions and all this game that we're playing to put this incredible data set together, and to help each other see rare birds. Like, it's like a camaraderie. It's a community.
Totally. Yep. Yeah, we're so lucky to be part of this community for sure. I want to sign off here. Do you want to add anything else before we close out?
Actually, I do, Will. One of the things that's been happening this past week, and I won't be any surprise to folks who are out actively birding, is that now that we're in this mid to late July period, there are juvenile birds coming out everywhere of all kinds of different species, and the adults are so busy raising them. And and then when these babies pop out, like, people are like, well, what is this, and why are there hundreds of chimney swifts now when there was only 5 up until now? And that's really the reason. And so this video went viral, I believe, this week in Louisville, Kentucky. Have a look at this.
All right.
Mama killed her at night, and you can tell that she's agitated around the drain here. Folks walk up, and as expected, the poor chick fell through the grate and is stuck down there.
Oh,
Not good.
These guys jump down in there.
crouch down and grab the baby. That is amazing.
They tried to jump back in.
That is one of the cutest baby birds in the world, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Although that noise is not one of my favorite noises, if I'm being honest. Like Canada goose and killdeer get a little shrill in the ear at times, but oh my gosh, are they pretty? They're like little puff balls. And kudos
Yeah.
to the non-birders who went and did that and figured out that what was going on. Because a lot of people would see the mama killdeer going crazy or and not know what to do or not know what was going on.
Yeah.
So pretty neat
That is
video.
super awesome. Yeah, restoring my faith in humanity a little bit. I need that this week.
Always, it's always uplifting to get those stories.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning into this week of the Real Birding Podcast. As you know, Caleb and I appreciate each and every one of you viewers and everybody who comments. If you are a person who conducts citizen science and we left any of your favorite citizen science methods off of this video, drop it in the comments. I'm sure we'll go smack ourselves on the forehead for leaving stuff out. Also, if you are from a foreign country, can you let us know what your experience is using eBird? Has it always been what you've done as a birder, or has it come around more in recent years? I'm really curious to hear from you guys about that.
And if you don't use eBird, what do you use? And is it better than eBird? And what would it take to get you to consider to use eBird too? I'd be curious to hear folks' thoughts on that.
Absolutely. Drop it in the comments. But until then, go out there, do some citizen science, use eBird, and we'll see you next week.
We'll see you next week, everybody. Thanks for listening. Peace.
Bye.